Hello and welcome to a new Vital Signs live webinar. Today it's my pleasure to welcome Dr. Jeffrey Long, who has researched and reviewed more than 4,000 cases of near-death experience, also known as NDE. He's the best-selling author of Evidence of the Afterlife, the Science of Near-Death Experiences. This field of inquiry is somewhat displaced from his regular role as a radiation oncologist or cancer doctor in Kentucky. We'll hear some of what sparked his interest in the afterlife today. What does NDE reveal about what lies beyond death and the existence of the human soul? Dr. Long, welcome to Vital Signs. Great pleasure to have you on. Before we get into it, I'll just let the audience know they can submit their own questions to you by clicking the link below and entering the code there. To start with, Dr. Long, what is near-death experience? How would you sum that up in a nutshell?
Sure. Near-death experience is defined exactly as the phrase implies. You're near death. In other words, you're so physically compromised that you're unconscious or maybe clinically dead with no measurable heartbeat. So at that time, when you're unconscious and shouldn't have any lucid memory at that time, you do. And that's the experience part of the near-death experience.
Okay, and your usual work is as a radiation oncologist. This is an established part of medical science. It's somewhat displaced from researching this field of what happens after we die. Did something personal spur you on to you've been doing this for 25 years? Did something trigger this specifically, or did you encounter someone who'd had such an experience?
Right. My interest began many decades ago when I was in my residency training for my medical specialty of radiation oncology, or the use of radiation to treat cancer. That was so many decades ago. We didn't have internet. That dates me, I know. But back then, I was going through a huge, thick volume of the Journal of the American Medical Association looking for a cancer-related article. So as I was flipping through the journal, quite by accident, I found an article that had in the title, Near-Death Experience. And I hadn't heard of that before, and I was puzzled. Everything I knew in medical school and my medical training said you're either alive or you're dead, but how can there be a near-death experience? So intrigued, I read the article, and here was a cardiologist, a heart doctor, that had studied several dozen people that had cardiac arrest. Their heart stopped, and yet at that time they had near-death experiences. Their consciousness, as often occurs in NDEs, rose above their body, and from that vantage point, they could see and hear ongoing earthly events of the people trying to frantically bring them back to life. And they were accurate down to the finest detail. I was amazed. And I remember thinking, number one, if this is true, this changes my view of the universe. And number two, why aren't more people doing research on this? So then several years later, I had a college friend visit, and his wife over the dinner table shared an experience that she didn't understand what happened. Well, it turned out it was a near-death experience while she was under general anesthesia, and a fairly detailed one. So I was hooked.
Did she have some kind of life-threatening situation that led to her being in?
Oh, here, I'll tell you about life-threatening situation. She was under general anesthesia, and she had a lot of medical allergies, so many and so severe, in fact, that while she was under general anesthesia having surgery, they gave her a medicine that caused a severe allergic reaction, and her heart stopped. And believe me, that under operations medically, that's very well monitored. So boom, her EKG, electrocardiogram that measures heart electrical activity, boom, totally flat. So she then had what often happens at out-of-body experience, consciousness over her body, again, sawing the frantic efforts of people trying to bring her back to life and deal with that unexpected medical crisis. She then passed through a tunnel and was in this beautiful, unearthly, heavenly realm. She met some deceased loved ones, had a very detailed near-death experience, but she didn't know what happened. She had was not aware of near-death experience. So I told her that I'd read about that and sent her some articles on that, but I was hooked. Now, I'm a professional doctor, and I make my judgments when I treat my cancer patients based on evidence. Very focused on that. So I said, what's the best way to get evidence to satisfy my own curiosity? Our near-death experience is real. So to do that, I set up my research website, the Near-Death Experience Research Foundation. That was over 25 years ago. Immediately had a detailed questionnaire, and boom, after the first couple dozen experiences rolled in, I was like, wow, I get it. The pattern is unmistakable. Near-death experiences are, in a word, real.
And just going back to the experience you related of your college friend's wife,
Mhm.
how did she know, or how did you know this wasn't some kind of a hallucination, or like a dream experience, or something like that?
Right. When I first heard it, I didn't know because I hadn't done the research and I hadn't explored it. So one of the first questions I asked in my survey was your experience dreamlike in any way? Very openly worded so that people would share anything about their experience that was at all like a dream. Well, that was my very first version of the survey, and oh gosh, did I get an earful in the responses over and over. No way, no how, not even close. You're kidding. So embarrassed at how obvious it was to people that had near-death experiences that it was not dreamlike in any way. I never brought that question up in any future surveys.
So it's
Regarding
kind of
holistic,
like it's as if it's like a wakeful experience is what
yeah,
they're describing. It's
oh,
as vivid as if they're awake.
right. We ask directly now to compare their level of consciousness during their near-death experience to their consciousness in earthly everyday life. And even though they're physically unconscious or clinically dead, about three-fourths say that their level of consciousness and alertness is actually greater than during their earthly everyday life. And about another 20% say it's equivalent. So that's mind-boggling to realize that they're actually processing information, seeing, hearing, understanding even faster than they do in their earthly life. And just to touch briefly on the question about hallucination, I'm a doctor. I know hallucinations because some of my patients have them. Hallucinations are unreal. Events skip around like they do in dreams. You don't see that in near-death experiences. Hallucinations are much more likely to be frightening than near-death experiences. And they have hallucinations, as the name implies. It's unreal. They have unreal content. Even the person having a hallucination, most of the time, when they get over what it is that caused the hallucination, realize, wow, that wasn't real. That experience was hallucination. It was not a part of reality. Near-death experiencers, when they come out of their experience, they know that that experience was grippingly real, completely different near-death experience and hallucinations.
This brings to mind another phenomenon that I'm aware of, and I know that you're aware of as well, Dr. Long, paradoxical lucidity,
Mhm.
where this is where someone who they may have dementia, they have their brain has significantly reduced functioning, and suddenly they gain clarity again. I know it's also seen with people who have who are close to death. It's called terminal lucidity. The same phenomena where they seem to have no consciousness, but suddenly their consciousness kicks in. I remember going back about 14 years, being with my own grandmother. She was in her 90s, and she had dementia, and she'd gotten to the point where she couldn't remember who I was. She was just nonsensical in the way she spoke, and she'd been like this for months, probably longer than that. And I took her out one day, and I was a photographer at the time, and I showed her a book I'd taken with photos I'd taken, and she amazed me by actually registering these photos, looking at them, and engaging in it, and started asking questions about them. And I was shocked. And she said something also at that time. She said, I don't suppose I'm going to be alive much longer. And in the past, she'd been preoccupied with death, but with the way she said it this time, it kind of had this legitimacy to it, like an awareness to it. And as it turned out, that was the last time that I spent with her. She passed away a few weeks after that. Is this phenomena of paradoxical lucidity, is that related to near-death experience?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, first of all, thanks for sharing that. Absolutely. I think it's been in recent years that there's been a lot more writing about that paradoxical lucidity. We now know a lot more about it than we used to. It's very uncommon, but it does happen. There's been several hundred or more cases reported here in recent years. What happens is exactly as you described with your grandmother. They're near death. They have, or at least within weeks of dying. They may have dementia. They may have gone weeks, typically months, many months often, being unable to communicate, bedridden, and yet right near the end of their life, they have, as the name implies, that lucidity. All of a sudden, their eyes open up, they become aware, they can talk more fluently, process mentally. Cognition is much better than it was, even for many, many months. And that can go on briefly for minutes, it can go on for hours. And I think it's part of that bigger picture of how consciousness can happen. It's sort of like there's a big umbrella of that spiritual consciousness. Near-death experiences are here, terminal lucidity are here, other experiences are here, but it's all part of that package. It's all part of that lucidity, that consciousness that occurs as you approach death. With near-death experiences, probably the final step as you go to permanent or reversible death. But it seems that there's no question about that. All of that, certainly very powerful arguments that you, me, and everybody watching this, our consciousness, who we are, everything that we are, is much more than just our physical brain. There seems to be much more operating that can allow us under circumstances to have consciousness, lucidity that would otherwise be impossible.
Certainly, there seems to be a whole realm of experience that isn't that recognized by medical science, but the kind of work you're doing is hoping to bridge that gap, I imagine. I just want to remind our audience that they can submit questions to you, Dr. Long. They can just by clicking the link below and entering that code. I'll just have a look now if we have any questions or anything else from the audience.
Yeah, it'd be great. I love questions. So folks, jump right in. If you got a question, I'll do my best to answer.
Okay. We have a story here from someone from CADZ999. 3 years ago, I had a major heart attack. I was clinically dead for 45 minutes. CPR, 7 shots of epinephrine and 8 shocks. I was revived after the 6th shock. I yelled stop because it hurt so much, but thank God they didn't, as I was dead and talking to him. Never heard or felt anything until he said clear. In my mind, told him to stop because I'd had enough. Nothing again, then clear, but I came through this time. My wife, son, and daughter-in-law were all watching. Another story from Michael Washenik. I was shot in the chest in Vietnam, July 68. I was able to see life flash in my mind in seconds.
Mm-hmm.
And we have a question from Sky Allison. Do any of the folk involved report feelings of fear? How long are those in the study clinically dead?
Yeah. Well, thanks to you, those of you that shared those stories about, those life-threatening events. But getting back to fear and near-death experiences, while the overwhelming majority of near-death experiences involve intense feelings of peace, love, actually very positive emotions, there's a distinct minority of experiences where they feel fear. There's several different things that may lead to fear. I mean, for some people, as we talked about, that initial out-of-body experience, consciousness above their body, they may be frightened by that. It's so unfamiliar. I mean, you can sure understand that, can't you? I mean, you've never had that in your life. Boom, there's your physical body down below. That's kind of, you're unconscious. That's pretty scary. And here you are having a conscious experience over your body. So we do periodically see people having fright, typically early in the near-death experience, often around that life-threatening injury or illness that is creating that close brush with death. The great majority of those that have fear early on under those circumstances, the fear clears, and they go on to have that, especially in that unearthly or heavenly realm that many of them enter. At that time, overwhelming, typically senses of peace, love, connection with those around them, often a strong feeling, a sense of home. So that's how most of them go. As far as the horribly frightening near-death experiences, or especially encounters of hellish realm, we're down to no more than 1% of near-death experiences. And that's a certain subgroup that we're still actively studying and trying to understand, because it is so separate from the norm of the great majority of near-death experiences that are very positive.
Is there a case that comes to mind where someone has had an unpleasant experience in their NDE?
Sure. We have, I mean, by the time we have over 4,000 near-death experiences, even if there are only a couple percent of them, well, gosh, we have scores. So we have a lot of them to review. What would be a good one? Just sort of generically, the near-death experiences, and there seems to be no demographic attribute that would predict it, male, female, age, belief system. It's just sometimes they can become aware of, say, a hellish environment. And there's a couple different ways that they can do that. The most common is to be, when they're see or be aware of a hellish environment, we're in that unearthly heavenly realm, often moving through it, and typically with another spiritual being. So at that time, they may be aware of a environment that they know or can sense is hellish or malevolent or evil. When that happens, almost always that environment, that realm, is separated, segmented from all the rest of that heavenly realm that they're in. So when people say in heaven there can't possibly be hell, that's absolutely correct. They see that, so they're aware of it. They know that that's sort of a realm where the sort of the evil, malevolent souls end up. Less commonly, people are actually in that realm, and they can encounter all sorts of frightening, varied appearances, sounds, etc. I want to emphasize that even when they do enter that hellish realm, first of all, many near-death experiencers simply ask to be removed, may cry out to God, they may cry out to Jesus, and they may then exit that realm. At other times, if they go through that realm, when they recover from their near-death experience, they may come with the belief of, oh, I needed that experience to change some things I had in my life that were serious issues, that resentments, that anger, that stuff, that baggage. And they may say, there's absolutely no other way I could have confronted that or dealt with that other than to have that type of experience. So it ends up having a silver lining to that dark cloud of a hellish experience. Both me and all the other major near-death experiencers, researchers that I'm aware of, in spite of our review and understanding of these hellish realms, don't believe for a minute that any of us are going to be involuntarily in a hellish realm permanently. The rule in the afterlife is love, overwhelming love, and we seem to be in the afterlife, a part of that universal love, and that's, and interestingly, when you get back to those hellish realms, in a way, the demonic beings there, that is their heaven. In other words, they want to be around other people like themselves that have that values of evil. And to them, they're much happier there than being in a realm where everybody is loving, happy, and content. So paradoxically, that seems to be a realm for certain individuals in the afterlife in what we now know as hell.
What you described there, it also brings to mind the kinds of experiences that some people have during psychoses, and also the idea of leaving the body, out of body experience. This is something that people have experienced. I don't know if it's the same. Perhaps you can clarify, Dr. Long. But I know out of body experience is also something that's associated with use of psychedelic drugs and things of that sort. Is there a connection between these things, do you think?
Well, let's look at psychedelic drugs, because that's a common thing in this day and age for people to wonder about. Are psychedelic drugs related to near-death experiences? Okay, I was a physician. I'm very interested in that. First of all, a few years ago, me and a number of co-authors wrote a journal article for the Journal of the Academy of, a major prestigious journal, the Academy of the New York Academy of Sciences. So this was a very high-end journal, and as part of that, my co-investigators looked at all the published, or at least many of the major published articles about what you experience under psychotropic drugs. And by the way, psychotropic drugs, as the name implies, psycho, brain, tropic, acting. So these are the DMTs, the psilocybin, etc., LSDs. All of these are types of psychotropic drugs. So in that article, we reviewed the literature of psychotropic drugs and their effects, and we also reviewed what happens during a near-death experience. The conclusion of that peer-reviewed published article was radically different. Psychotropic drugs don't seem to have any overlap or significant commonality with near-death experiences in virtually every way. So that's one. Number two, if you study first-person psychotropic drug experiences, and by the way, for those of you that really want to pursue that yourself, bop on over to the website Erowid, EROWID.org. There you will find literally thousands of first-person experiences of psychotropic drugs. If you look at pick whatever psychotropic drug you want to do, DMT, psilocybin, LSD, you name it, pick one or several. But if you look at what people have shared about their experiences with psychotropic drugs and compare it to what people describe that have a near-death experience, and we have thousands of them posted on our near-death experience research website, nderf.org, you can immediately see very obviously what occurs is substantially different experiences. Psychotropic drugs far more likely to be hallucinatory, unpleasant, events skip around like dreams, really radically different as a group. And then finally, we have a number of people that share their near-death experience that then volunteer that they took psychotropic drugs, and the substantial majority of these experiences where there's a near-death experience shared and their psychotropic drug experience or experiences, they once again will generally say no relationship between the two. Near-death experience was grippingly real, psychotropic experience obviously unreal. So that's my comments on psychotropic drugs. I do admit on very uncommon, rare occasions, there's some overlap with psychotropic drugs with some of the things that go on with near-death experiences, and that's been well documented in the literature. But in general, as far as the details of those experiences, they're very different.
Okay. In a little while, I'd like to hear an example, perhaps the most compelling example you have of near-death experience that you've encountered, Dr. Long. Before that, we'll just go to the audience again for a second and see if there's any further questions. We have a question from Paul Marston. How does past life memory fit into this when you realize that you recognize individuals in this life you knew in a previous life? Is there any connection there, do you think?
Sure. That's an interesting question. There are occasional near-death experiences that become aware of their prior lives, the great majority being prior earthly lives, one or multiple. So we do have some pretty significant evidence in near-death experiences for the reality of, if you will, reincarnation or past life or memory. But there's other lines of scientific study of past life memories. Typically, there's the classic work being done by Dr. Ian Stevenson, and he went over to studied a number of children that had memories. And it was, there's several hundreds of these cases reported from their investigations. Children would often be vividly descriptive in remembering their prior life. And in scores of these cases, when the researchers checked it out, they found, boom, things corroborated. In other words, there were people they described, places that these children described that were real, that the children could not possibly have known about. So it seems to be, once again, that bigger umbrella of consciousness. We're far more than just the function of our physical brain. There seems to be that critical consciousness that goes on living. Many people call it the soul, but that seems to be all of these converging lines of evidence into the reality of that we're more than our physical brain. We do have a conscious afterlife, and that the soul seems to be a reality.
What you say there, it seems almost like an overwhelming thing. How great this other realm of existence could be, it brings to mind a film. I'm not sure. Have you ever seen the film Fearless with Jeff Bridges?
Oh, I missed that film. But what's it got?
This film, it goes back to, it came out in 1993. He plays a character who is in a plane crash, and most of the people are killed. And during the plane crash, he just has this incredible sense.
A film in 3 minutes.
Over this calm come over him, and he actually is able to calm the other passengers in the plane and reassure them. And he survives the accident. He has no injury, while many people are killed, many people seriously injured. And he comes out of this with this fearlessness, as the title of the film suggests. and it kind of opens up his life. He wants to spread this this new awareness that he has, and he helps other survivors of the crash to come to terms with their trauma. But one thing that happens is that he kind of becomes disconnected from his own wife and son, because he's preoccupied with this new awareness, and it kind of creates a chasm of understanding between them. So I wonder, is this something that perhaps comes up? How do you see it affecting people's relationships? Is it ever disruptive to people and their relationships?
Yeah, that's a great question. This all gets into a area that's been very carefully studied by many investigators, called after effects. These are the changes typically observed following a near-death experience. Certainly, they're very consistently described. They may take literally years before they're fully manifest, and unlike other major life events, the intensity or the impact of these after effects over the years to decades later actually seems to increase. Again, commensurate with the people that have a near-death experience understanding, hey, that was a real experience, and it's appropriate that I change my life in response. But what both retrospective and prospective studies have found in these after effects are, well, as you would imagine, they have a reduced fear of death. Now, that's no surprise, is it? I mean, they know what lies beyond death's door. It's an afterlife, a wonderful afterlife. So that results in a dramatic reduction in fear of death after a near-death experience. And of course, commensurate with that, an increased belief in an afterlife, again, for the same reason. But beyond that, over and over, studies find that they have changes in their values. They typically become far more compassionate, loving, not only to their family, to themselves, actually, and to other people that they encounter in their everyday life. They may leave unloving relationships, so there can be divorces. However, marriages can be much stronger. They have a near-death experience, they're more loving, more attentive, and certainly that can also strengthen a marriage. They become less materialistic. They have an increased belief in God. And those are, many, many other after effects, but those are some of the major ones that have been described, not only by other researchers, but actually along the lines of a recent study that I published in one of the largest studies that had ever been published about near-death experience after effects in 834 near-death experience. So again, we're seeing exactly what our other researchers had been describing literally for decades.
Well, it really points to the largely optimistic and hopeful aspect of having this kind of experience that seems to come through. One thing I know that many people are interested in hearing about is where people encounter relatives, where they encounter a loved one during their near-death experience. Can you relate one such experience, Dr. Long?
Sure. Well, they're not rare. About 20% of people that have a near-death experience will encounter deceased loved ones. The majority of the time, they're relatives. They can be, however, friends, spouses even. And interestingly, we have a fairly good-sized series of encountering deceased beloved pets. But when they encounter these deceased loved ones, even if that loved one died of very advanced age or a disfiguring accident or illness, when they're encountered, and that's generally, again, in this unearthly or heavenly realm, when they are reunited, these are joyous reunions. There's a lot of interaction, and the person that died in their earthly life appears essentially always picture-perfect health. We've had several that lost a limb, leg, or an arm in earthly life. When they appear in the near-death experience, all 4 limbs are intact. So a remarkable evidence of healing. So in fact, interestingly, if they died at a very, very advanced age, they may literally appear decades younger when they are encountered in the near-death experience. And we have some uncommon times where the person encountered in the near-death experience died in early infancy, and they may appear a few years older as middle to older childhood. So picture perfect health, joyous reunions, lots of communication, lots of sharing, very inspiring to the near-death experiencer who may have worried, what happened to my loved one when they died? Are they okay? Well, the near-death experience vividly answering that, yes, absolutely, they're okay, in that beautiful, unearthly, heavenly realm. In fact, they're far more okay, those that have died and gone on, than those of us slogging through our often difficult earthly lives.
You mentioned some have experiences of their pets. Do you have an example of that?
Sure. Just one, gosh, there's so many. Okay, just one out of many. There was a lady who had a beloved pet horse and had to put the horse down because the horse was ill and was going to die anyway. And so she was just racked with guilt because the horse was her best friend. So she had a near-death experience, and literally the horse appeared, and there was communication, and the horse and her communicating was able to remove all guilt she had. The horse said, "I know that I was dying. It's okay. And there's no need to feel any guilt or sorrow about that." The horse was able, of course, was in an unearthly heavenly realm. And so you can just imagine how tremendously reassuring that was to this person, understanding that their horse, didn't even have to forgive her because there's nothing to forgive. I mean, there's no reason to have any guilt or resentment. And the horse being in that beautiful unearthly realm. So again, hugely inspirational to the person that had that near-death experience, had that awareness, able to go on living the rest of her life without that guilt or those difficult emotional reactions that had haunted her up until that time.
Yeah, that must have been incredibly reassuring.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that it's also, I don't know if it's common, perhaps you could shed some light on what proportion of people have this kind of experience where they encounter a being that they identify as God or some divine being, something of that nature.
Mm-hmm. Well, I've actually studied that and written a book about that. So I was so fascinated as my years of research went on. Over and over, I would see people encountering, and the best human word that they could use is God. So as we get into this discussion, I would emphasize that many near-death experiencers say that during their near-death experience, while the best word they have is God, no earthly word can possibly describe that being they met that had the beauty, the overwhelming love of all that they were, that overwhelming intelligence, that awareness of being a creator. They say these are earthly words that you try to use to describe something that is far beyond earthly language. But again, God is the best term we have, so we'll go with that. When people encounter God, and again, this is typically obviously in that unearthly or heavenly realm, don't forget, when we keep talking about that heavenly realm, it is not a geographically separate three-dimensional physical world like we know here. So laying down some foundational concepts, in that afterlife, it is non-physical. Communication is non-physical. It's not like we're talking here. It's essentially always telepathic, thought to thought, but beyond that, instantaneous communication of all concepts, context behind it, emotions behind it. It's like far beyond what you would consider telepathic. Movement is non-physical. You don't walk like you hear on Earth. Movement can be very rapid, very slow, but it's non-physical. Time in the afterlife realm is either described as almost invariably in near-death experience accounts, it's either radically different than we know in our earthly life or simply doesn't exist. So we have that going on too. So when we talk about this, be aware that it's literally a non-physical realm, this afterlife realm, that is completely different from everything we've known in our physical, earthly, everyday life.
When you say that the time ceases to exist, how does a person experience that?
Right. It's very common for people. Well, we've talked very briefly about that life review or encountering part or all of their prior life during their near-death experience. Just as an example of how rapid acceleration of consciousness can be and how time doesn't exist there, people can be aware of all certainly even all of their prior life, and that's not at all unusual, about 15 to 20%. And during a near-death experience, they may review decades of their prior life. And they may be aware of literally every single event. Well, that would take decades in normal physical earthly life. And yet here in the afterlife where time doesn't exist, they can be aware of all that. They can be aware of how their life played out. They can form opinions about that in the literal minutes that they're unconscious or clinically dead. So that's a fairly vivid example of how timelessness it is over there. But near-death experiencers may have a great deal of experience, interaction, basically playing out that near-death experience, which would be days, weeks, even months of their earthly life on some extreme cases, and yet they're unconscious or clinically dead for minutes. So when they come back and say it's timeless, I think to at least to a first conceptualization, that means that they can have a tremendously long, elaborate, detailed experience in literally minutes of earthly life that would be equivalent roughly to, as we said, days, weeks, even in some rare cases, months. So that's a good example of radical difference of timelessness. So in that realm, when you encounter God, you could understand that it's going to be very different from what you might conceptualize physically in our earthly life. Getting back to that important question, appearance, typically described as a white light. That's the most common descriptor, but nothing like the light we know on Earth. It's often described as brilliant, having a personality. One would say, many near-death experiencers say, like 1,000,000 times 1,000,000 suns, but doesn't hurt the eyes. There's no discomfort. Second most common descriptor, the overwhelming love of God. They, time and time again, the people having near-death experiences that encounter God say they're loved beyond anything they knew on Earth. They're loved completely who they are, everything that they are, with completely without judgment, which they often find incredibly reassuring. There can be communication, again, that non-physical communication. God may be present during that life review, or they encounter their prior life review, again, in a realm remarkably of non-judgment. So this is just sort of a snapshot about what near-death experience. It's about 15% describe when they're either aware of or more directly actually encounter God during a near-death experience.
Quite a life-changing experience that would be. I have no doubt. I would just like to remind viewers you can still submit questions to Dr. Long by clicking on the link below and entering the code there. I'll just have a look if the audience have submitted further questions at this stage.
Mm-hmm.
We have some accounts have been shared here. I'll just this one comes from Laura Lee. I have a neighbor who, as a child, had a severe lung condition and often coughed intensely. One day she coughed so hard that she passed out. Her family gathered around her in tears, and after a while she woke up and said, "The sandstorm is so strong today, I can't even open my eyes." Her family was puzzled since it was a clear day. She then explained, "Just now 2 people were leading me somewhere. We reached a place where another person sitting there yelled at them, saying, 'Not her,' and then I woke up." This true story is the first thing I think of whenever people mention near-death experiences. So that's certainly a stirring account there.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. Very uncommonly, but often in non-Western cultures, there will be an awareness that they say you're not your time. You're not the one. In other words, there seems to be from another being an expression to the person having the near-death experience that it's not your time. They'll very commonly be told, you need to return to your earthly life. They're essentially never given specific instructions to do, specific directions, what they need to do with the rest of their life. They just simply know it's not your time or you have more to do. And that's implying that with that particular experience. Thanks for sharing.
Thank you. Yes, thank you, Laura, I think it was. This is from Deanna Sinclair Parker. I have had 2 NDE, near-death experiences, one at 7 years old and another at 29 years old. I'm 69 years old now, and I remember both events clearly. Jesus was with me both times. Another one from TCL CIT 19. When I was 2.5 or 3, I had a near-death experience. I was extremely ill. When I felt myself flying out of my body, I paused above the window and examined the valence. It was the 1950s. I never saw it because of my very poor vision and was fascinated by the Paisley design. So I guess this was the first time she'd actually seen this.
Oh, that's, yeah, thanks for sharing. That's very interesting.
I'll just continue this just for a second, Dr. Long.
Okay.
I heard my mother screaming, looked down and saw the doctor leaning over me. Then I was pulled down at a great rate of speed and I was back 70 plus years ago and still clear.
Yeah, that's both those last 2 accounts raise an important point, that being during near-death experiences, they are remembered far better than other earthly events that occurred around the time of the near-death experience. That's been examined in both several prospective studies, but also retrospective studies. Near-death experiences seem to be, as we've discussed already, a very special type of consciousness. And amazingly, it tends to be retained in memory years, even decades later. People have found that even 10, 15 years after the near-death experience, in the largest retrospective study of this type, they found that what they describe of happening during the near-death experience, the details, was neither embellished, in other words, added to, nor forgotten, details forgotten, when they compared the original account of the near-death experience with them sharing it 10 to 15 years later. And prospective studies find that the experience seems to be remembered verbatim 7 years later, when they stopped accrual or stopped follow-up on their large prospective studies. So amazingly, even though these near-death experiences seem remarkable, here you have people exactly like just shared with us, remembering their experience verbatim, exactly how it happened decades later. You know, obviously a far better recall of the near-death experience due to that special type of consciousness than any other earthly event around that time, which would have been far more likely to be forgotten.
Remarkable imprinting on the mind, it seems.
Yeah.
And I have one question here. Are near-death experiences different in children generally compared to adults? What might the differences be?
That's a good question. I was curious about that too, so I investigated it. I got a study group of, it was 23 kids that were age 5 and younger. Median and average age was 3.5 years old. I thought that was a great study group because at that young age, they're practically culturally, if you will, a blank slate. They almost certainly don't have well-formed religious beliefs, or they don't have well-formed beliefs about death. They've almost certainly never heard of near-death experience or wouldn't understand that. So in this study group that I had, I compared their responses to 33 survey questions that we have, that was the characteristics, the elements, what happens during the near-death experience, and compared their responses to those key 33 questions to the responses of older children and adults. And to my substantial surprise, there was no statistical difference between the very young children and the group of older children and adults. It seems absolutely amazing to me, even after studying this 25 years, that children, when they have their near-death experience, and actually wherever in the world they have it, what happens, what occurs is going to be strikingly similar to older children and adults. Now, that's not to say it's exactly the same. They may have something that is more age specific. They may be more likely to have another being around them. Interestingly, even at that very young age, over and over, children will often seem to have a much more developed cognition. In other words, they'll say, I understood things much better during my near-death experience than I did in my earthly everyday life around that. So we see that once again, that very special type of consciousness described over and over in near-death experiences in terms of that very young children group.
That brings to mind something personal as well, that you saying that. I have this recollection going back to perhaps when I was about 3 years old, and being in the kitchen of the home, and I just, it was just kind of coming into awareness. It was just, I just had this experience of, okay, I'm here, you know, and let's get on with it. And that's kind of where if I trace my consciousness back, it's to that kind of very set point. Is this something that you've also come across, or do you think there's a connection?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I'd sure have to know more about your experience.
Maybe I banged my head against the fridge or something like that, and then.
Yeah. Okay. Ouch. Yeah. I mean, it's hard to really know. I mean, sometimes, you know, near-death experiences are pretty much defined by being physically unconscious or clinically dead, and then having consciousness apart from the physical body. So it doesn't sound like you had that, but there was certainly, you know, something. Was it a spiritual event? Was it something that was especially dramatic that led to you remembering it that distinctly and maintaining that memory for that many decades? So, you know, again, it's one of those mysteries of consciousness. I'd sure encourage you or anybody else that has that intriguing early memory, you know, think about that. Why did you remember that? What is there? Is there anything I can learn from that might be important and inform how I live the rest of my life? So I'm always intrigued by those special types of consciousness. They often, not always, but often occur for a reason.
I just want to remind viewers they can still submit questions by clicking the link below. And also you can subscribe to Epoch TV by clicking the subscription button just below there as well to access to these kinds of enlightening videos and inspiring videos and informative videos with experts like Dr. Long. And I alluded to earlier, I'm interested to know, actually, one of the questions from the audience brought to mind the story that you told before of a lady who was born blind. One of the viewer mentioned she was able to see the valence in her room that she couldn't see because she had low vision, but during her NDE, she was able to see this. It reminded me of this particular case that you spoke about, where this lady was born blind and was able to see during her NDE. Would you like to talk about that a little bit, Dr. Long?
Oh, sure. That's one of the most amazing near-death experiences. Her name was Vicki, and she was literally born totally blind. To Vicki, vision was unknown and unknowable. You cannot explain vision as we all know it in terms of the remaining 4 physical bodily senses. I tried, and you just can't do it. Vicki was a professional singer. She had a beautiful voice, and so she would often sing in bars. And then one night, unfortunately, an inebriated patron was driving her home and boom, had a really bad car wreck. So for the first time Vicki had vision, she was in that, what we've talked about, out-of-body experience with her consciousness over her body, and there, boom, down below where she saw her body on the gurney in the emergency room. Initially, she was very frightened because vision was so unfamiliar to her, she didn't know what was going on. And finally, when she calmed down, she correlated what she only knew by feel for all of her prior life. She had the feel of her very long hair and also a ring that her father had given to her that, again, she only knew by feel. She realized, wow, I'm seeing it now. That's the ring. That's my hair. That's me. And then upon realizing that, she then later, as part of her near-death experience, passed through a tunnel, went into a beautiful unearthly realm. She had vision, and to Vicki, her vision that she had during her near-death experience was what we call 360-degree vision. Vicki was simultaneously aware of and processing visual information during her NDE in front of her, behind her, right, left, up, down, technically spherical vision, and had a very detailed, very prolonged near-death experience with this type of vision. So when I talked to Vicki and told her that all the rest of us in our earthly life that have intact vision, our vision is limited to what we call pie-shaped visual fields because of the location of our eyes in our head, Vicki literally laughed at me. She said, no, that can't be, because don't forget, her entire life experience was 360-degree vision, and she literally couldn't understand how that was possible, that vision could be limited, as we all know it, because of the location of our eyes and our physical vision in our body. So beyond that, I've been very interested in, as the near-death experience was described, that lady that had very poor vision, and yet during her near-death experience as a child, apparently very sharp vision of environment around her. We ask now in our survey question very directly about their vision during their earthly life, immediately prior to their near-death experience, and their vision during their near-death experience. So we now have a decent-sized series of people that either had substantially impaired vision or were legally blind and had a near-death experience. Almost invariably in this group, when they have their near-death experience, their vision is either normal or supernormal, as Vicki describes, and as the experience we heard earlier. They may have impaired vision, but essentially always during the near-death experience, vision is crystal clear, and maybe even, like Vicki described, supernormal spherical vision going on. So again, yet another of many lines of evidence we've talked about for the reality of near-death experience being real and supernormal consciousness.
How was Vicki changed by her experience?
Oh, yeah, very much so. I mean, she became kind of a celebrity. People realized she had a near-death experience. So she talked to an awful lot of groups. Certainly, it helped her to, like many other near-death experiencers, have those after effects we alluded to earlier. She certainly would have gone through those changes of being confident in an afterlife, having reduced fear of death, being more loving and more compassionate as a result of her experience, and certainly understanding when people talked with her about vision, she could now not know nothing about it, because having no life experience could now understand what people were talking about in a way she couldn't before.
And there was something exceptional about this case as well, where she, out of her near-death experience, she kind of gained new abilities. Could you say a little bit about that?
Sure. Vicki and some other people, and this is another area of active research, but they seem to, it's part of their changes, they may achieve what we call like paranormal gifts. Now, that's a little bit of a murky concept. First of all, when you have a near-death experience and you're far more compassionate or attentive to other people, out of that compassion, it may seem intuitive to other people. I mean, it's almost like you can read their mind. Well, that may not be actual mind-to-mind telepathic communication or reading. They may just simply be more aware, understanding, pick up on those nonverbal clues because they're more attentive, loving, compassionate toward other people, and that can come off as a paranormal gift. And I think Vicki had part of that too. You know, as far as some of the other more deeply paranormal phenomena, some of the psi phenomena, that's still, again, a very active area of investigation. And that's, you know, some people deeply believe that they have that phenomenon. As far as clear-cut cases, we don't, as far as something like bending spoons or clearly being aware consistently of distant events, or picking up like hidden cards, we don't really have a good study documenting that in any one individual or group of near-death experiencers.
And in her case, she was able to, she gained the ability to understand new languages and handle academic things that she hadn't been exposed to before.
Yeah, and we do see many near-death experiencers describe that. Again, you don't know if they're simply more confident, living their life more open, and more embracing life more fully than they ever did before, and so they become, it may seem like a gift, and yet they may have had that latent ability their entire life. They just simply are now more interested, focused, and compassionate in developing that. But, you know, learning new languages readily, you know, certainly that can be, was that something that's due to something mystically inexplicable, or was that just due to her newfound confidence or awareness? You know, still working it out. We don't have a very clear answer for that.
Okay. We'll be back in, we'll just be back in a second with you, Dr. Long, with some more aspects of near-death experience. I just want to remind viewers that they can still submit questions, and you can subscribe to access videos like these and other informative, insightful, and educational videos from Vital Signs and other Epoch TV health content just by clicking that subscribe button below. Now I'll just share a video, an upcoming Vital Signs video, a teaser with, this is with Dr. Schwelt, and this is showing some infrared and ultraviolet benefits of the sun that can actually help boost immunity in the face of infection.
I do believe that supplementing with vitamin D is worthwhile, but we just didn't see the real benefits that we thought we would see from that. We know that people who stay outside in the sun more often are going to have higher levels of vitamin D. And I began to wonder, well, maybe there was something about the sun that was working in a completely different way that was benefiting the human body. About 100 years ago, especially in Switzerland, Austria, there were something called tuberculosis sanatoriums where they would take people up to very high altitude, and they noticed that people got better really quickly. It's actually very high energy light coming from the sun.
We hear about so many different antioxidants that can be taken to combat COVID-19 or different infections in general. Where would you say the melatonin that's stimulated through sunlight fits in?
It's at the very top.
And we're back. I just want to check the audience again and see if we have any further questions. Is this something that's being more readily accepted in the scientific community?
Oh, no question about that. In the 25 years I've been doing this, heck, when I started out, I was so concerned about the reaction of my medical community or my patients or literally everybody. When I started my research website, I was Dr. Jeff, and I would not disclose my full name. I was working anonymously. Once I published my New York Times best-selling book, Evidence of the Afterlife, boom, I had to come out of the closet in a hurry. I couldn't pretend anymore. I wasn't actively involved in this research. There's a lot more suspicion about that early on, 25 years ago, but gosh, how the times have changed. In fact, in 2021, there was a Pew Forum survey published in which they asked people directly about, do you believe that a near-death experience is an actual visualization of the spirit leaving the physical body? And in America, amazingly, 72% of people answered yes to that, which basically is the defining phrase for near-death experiences and in embracing its reality. So today, nearly 3 out of 4 Americans embrace the reality of near-death experience. I've given a number of talks to medical groups, and to my delight in recent years, the physicians embrace the reality of near-death experience because they, like I, look for evidence. They look for the quality of evidence. They consider alternative explanations. And exactly like what we're sharing here today, there really isn't any good alternative brain function explanation. You just really have to accept that mountain of evidence as showing that near-death experiences really do convey the information about that spirit or soul leaving the physical body. So in the current time, there's certainly going to be skeptics. There's always going to be skeptics, but nowadays, the healthcare community, it's not just doctors. Nurses are even more on board in accepting near-death experiences. It's fairly common now, if someone has a life-threatening event, a question upon their gaining consciousness is, did you remember anything? Do you have a near-death experience? Only about 10 to 20% of people that nearly died do have a near-death experience, but that's still, like in America, there's probably well over millions of people that have a prior experience of a near-death experience. So nowadays, near-death experiences are far more accepted. We no longer think it's a brain dysfunction. We think it's truly a spiritual experience. Most of it's far greater belief than we ever had before. And we continue our research moving forward to find even more and more lines of evidence, all converging on that reality of near-death experiences and dealing with skeptic arguments about near-death experience. And oh, by the way, did I say skeptic arguments of near-death experience? There have been over 30 explanations of near-death experience from skeptics. And the reason there's so many is that no one or several skeptical explanations can begin to describe everything that we've even talked about today. They can't describe literally anything that occurs during a near-death experience, let alone the totality of what's consistently described during a near-death experience. So skeptics, while they may come up with brain functioning, and I've heard it all, electrical dysfunction, low blood oxygen levels, high carbon dioxide levels, I mean, you name it, I've heard it all. But the reason none of those fit in describing near-death experience is that no explanation like that of physical brain function describes the totality of what we see in near-death experience at all. And that's why there's so many different skeptical explanations floating around, because even the skeptics know that there's no one or several skeptical explanations that really adequately explain near-death experiences.
As a cancer doctor, you would be encountering people facing death. I mean, this would be, I imagine, not an uncommon encounter for you. How has researching this changed the way that you would work with these people?
Yeah, great question. It's changed me dramatically. Now that I can work with my cancer patients with that life-threatening illness, and cancer, believe me, that's a scary word. But now, knowing what I know about near-death experiences, it's as if I've taken a little piece of that wisdom from near-death experiencers into myself and given it back out to my patients. So I can now work with my patients far more compassionately, far more aggressively to give them the best possible chance of beating their cancer than I ever felt I could before. We periodically have patients that are aware of my research in near-death experience, and we can have amazing discussions. There's either the patient or family members may have had a near-death experience. We talk about it. They may know from my near-death experience research how confident, how I know that there's life after death. Even if they succumb to that cancer, there's still that silver lining that they're going to go on living. They're going to be reunited with their loved ones in that unearthly, beautiful heavenly realm. So it's an incredibly positive discussion. I go at fighting cancer far more courageously, and I think far more effectively with the knowledge I have than I ever could before.
What would you say to someone who perhaps does have a terminal illness and is facing the reality of death? What general advice would you give?
Sure. That's been very well worked out as a physician, what we should or should not say to patients. So I don't bring up near-death experiences unless they bring it up first. And heck, it's pretty easy for anybody that Googles me or investigates near-death experience to know how many years I've been doing this and how actively. So, for somebody that doesn't know about near-death experience, you really do the proper medical thing. You look at their belief system. What do you believe in? What's important to you? What are you confident? Are you confident in an afterlife? Is there anything that's on your mind that's frightening about what's going to happen next? So you really deal it with the patient's reality basis. You don't want to start bringing in something brand new, especially if they're very near the end of life. However, for many people that do want to talk about my research or do want to talk about near-death experience, well, heck, we've got a lot to talk about, as you've noticed in this show. So then we can, I gleefully bring in all the reality of near-death experience, how it means that we don't really die, that every single one of us has that consciousness that survives bodily death. We go on. As I literally tell people that have lost a loved one, that lost loved one who's died, they're in a far better place than you and I in that afterlife. And I really know that from a mountain of research and evidence. So we can be very reassuring to people facing that life-threatening event. And certainly medically speaking, we can do far more to keep people comfortable and engaged in their physical earthly life until they die. Hospice is absolutely amazing what they can do today. So between medical advances and between advances in understanding near-death experiences and related experiences, we can help people facing those terminal days and weeks in their life with far better confidence, far better information, and far more reassurance than we ever could before.
Okay. We'll just go to the audience again in a second. I just want to mention that Dr. Long's book, Evidence of the Afterlife, The Science of Near-Death Experiences, is available from Amazon, and we have the link in the description below. Also there, you'll find the link to the preview, the video, which I showed a teaser for just now with Dr. Schwelt looking at how the sun's infrared and ultraviolet rays can boost immunity. Now we'll see what the audience has.
Bring it on, folks. If you got questions, we'll be delighted to answer them. I certainly love that part of talks like this. So don't be shy. Bring it right up. And I certainly always enjoy hearing stories about near-death experiences, especially if you felt shy about sharing that, or if you just think it would be good for you to get it off your chest and share, go ahead and do that. This is a good and a safe forum. So wherever you want to go with this, that's perfectly okay.
I have one question here. Do you think that near-death experiences demonstrate the existence of a form of life superior to humans, such as beings capable of floating or possessing the ability to observe the world in unique ways?
Absolutely. In our non-physical earthly existence, we have as we've discussed, far accelerated consciousness. In fact, near-death experiencers, especially when they're in that unearthly or heavenly realm, they often describe what's called universal knowledge. In other words, they seem to have that awareness, knowledge of everything in the universe, math, science, arts, understandings, they say, far beyond anything that would be possible during their earthly life. In my early years of research, I kept waiting for some near-death experiencer to say, wow, bring back some nugget of wisdom from that universal knowledge. Bring us back something that will help us living our earthly lives, some advancement in science, technology that would be important. And none of them ever did. And finally, a near-death experiencer educated me when they encountered that universal knowledge. they came back and said, of course, we can't retain that in our earthly life because it's like trying to put an ocean of knowledge into that teacup that's our human brain. While you're aware of it in the near-death experience, you simply can't retain it or assimilate it. So we have that going on. But again, in that afterlife, typically, and especially in the more detailed near-death experiences, radically accelerated consciousness, far better awareness of that love that seems to rule the universe, that interaction, connection, even with others and all others. There's that, in addition to the universal knowledge, there seems to be that ability to move, not be constrained by time or by physicality that we have in our earthly life. So every shred of evidence from near-death experiences, and seen with overwhelming consistency, is that conscious afterlife is literally a far greater, far more developed place than our earthly physical life. We've had one near-death experiencer, I think, very appropriately say, hey, our physical earthly life is the boot camp of our eternal spiritual life.
And just a comment from Catherine Abramson. My NDE was at 18 or 19. My father's was a doctor, was in his 80s. Such a fascinating topic, one which no one forgets. I can't remember what I had for breakfast most days, but never forget one detail of my NDE.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. Exactly what we were saying earlier. The retention of the memory of near-death experience is completely different from other earthly lives. Events. And so again, it seems to be imprinted in our memory far more so than virtually any other earthly experience. So and the memories are retained years, decades later. And that's real important for me researching experiences where people may have had them years to decades previously. Given that comment and the studies that substantiate that comment, when we get near-death experience accounts and study them, we can be more confident than ever before that they're sharing exactly what really happened verbatim.
One question here, Dr. Long, have you discussed your findings with experts in related fields?
Yeah, fairly regularly. We interact, a classic one being physics. We have a number of people that are very knowledgeable about physics, looking into near-death experiences, and we have fascinating discussions about quantum phenomena. Is that sort of a foundation of consciousness, yay or nay? Certainly, many of people that are interested in psychology. There's a number of psychologists that are near-death experience researchers and some psychiatrists. So once again, we look at it from that perspective. Looking at near-death experiences from any scholarly perspective just simply makes sense. I firmly believe, even after studying near-death experiences for over 25 years, of what we don't know about near-death experiences exceeds what we do know. So it's always important to look at near-death experiences in every scholarly way possible. It's important to consider whatever skeptic arguments might be, all greater than 30, and go over that. But I've interacted quite a bit. I mean, you name it. I've talked to neurosurgeons, neurologists, psychologists, psychiatrists, physicists, really, people that are interested in the arts. So really, anybody that's got that, any thought to bear on the study of near-death experiences is very welcome as we all journey both individually as researchers and collectively in humanity to learning as much as we possibly can about these amazing experiences. And
another question, what would you say, based on your research, to someone who doesn't believe in the existence of the soul?
Okay, well, I've run into that quite a bit. Not to boast, but I've never lost a debate with, often it's atheists that don't believe in the existence of a soul or an afterlife. And the reason I haven't lost a debate is because the evidence is so substantial. The books that I've published have multiple lines of evidence. For example, we talk about that out-of-body experience. Body's unconscious or physically dead down below, and here's their point of conscious reference above their physical body. I and other researchers have found that what is seen and heard in that out-of-body experience is pinpoint accurate down to the finest details. That's medically inexplicable by physical brain function. In fact, even if those out-of-body observations are far away, and I mean city blocks, miles away, if they check it out after their near-death experience, almost invariably what they saw, what they heard is accurate down to the finest detail, absolutely beyond any possible explanation by physical brain function. And let's not forget also that when you're unconscious or clinically dead, you shouldn't even have a lucid memory, yet alone one that is so lucid, organized, memory retained for decades, and so consistent across cultures. We've talked about very young children's having strikingly similar to identical near-death experiences. I might add also that all around the world, and I've done by far the largest cross-cultural study of near-death experiences, we have hundreds of non-English near-death experiences and scores of near-death experiences shared even from non-Western countries. I've even written several scholarly articles about that with an Iranian co-investigator who is of Muslim belief. But our conclusions and the conclusions of my research too with this large data set is that it's amazing. It doesn't seem to make any difference whether you're, say, a Muslim in India, or a Hindu, anywhere else in the world, a Christian in the United States, someone that doesn't really have any belief in an afterlife, wherever you are on earth and whatever your belief, what happens during a near-death experience is strikingly similar. And that's yet another one of the many strong lines of evidence for the reality of near-death experience.
How do you think it would change things if this becomes more widely recognized, this phenomena? How, like, for example, the way we do medical care?
Yeah. There's no question that would change the world overwhelmingly for the better. I mean, look at the near-death experiencers themselves. Look at their after effects, how they change. We see that consistently. They're more compassionate. They're more loving. They can embrace life with less fear about living their earthly life. They know that there's life after death, and so they can live without that hanging fear of what happens to themselves, to their loved ones after they die. If only everyone in the world knew that as deeply as people that have near-death experiences or the near-death experience researchers, you would reduce that amazing problem of fear. You would embrace the values that we're all here, that love is what rules the universe, that we are really literally have that mystical connection or unity even that near-death experiencers so consistently describe. There could be a worldwide focus more on what unites us as a humanity as opposed to what divides us. In fact, I would say, and as an overview to all that, near-death experiences and their consistent spiritual messages and reality of an afterlife is literally the most positive message that is even conceivable to give out to all of humanity.
And just lastly, Dr. Long, what new directions do you have? And if you have new directions for your research, where do you plan on taking this going forward?
Sure. Well, we need more prospective studies, but they're very, very hard to do because hardly anyone wants to fund it. But we also need many more retrospective studies. So I've just got many, many different thinking about what to do here. I'm especially interested in that spiritual content of near-death experiences. I'm interested in other experiences related to near-death experiences. I mean, what can we learn? What's the connection here? All sort of points to consciousness. I know we're far more than just our physical earthly brain consciousness, but I think the more we nail down with confidence what that means, what the implications are for all of us living our physical earthly life, I think that's critical. And of course, we still need to look at evidence for the reality of near-death experience, because goodness knows there's always going to be those skeptics. The more evidence we have that all points to the reality of near-death experiences, the less we're going to hear from those skeptics and their myriad of explanations of near-death experience that really don't explain a thing. So lots of research to be done. It's literally a wide open field. I feel a little bit, even after 25 years, like a pioneer. So still exciting for me and the many others that continue to investigate these amazing near-death experiences.
And I'll just invite you, lastly, to just explain what viewers can find if they, in purchasing your book, Evidence of the Afterlife, The Science of Near-Death Experiences. We have that link in the description just below. Could you enlighten us to what additional information we'd find in there, Dr. Long?
Sure. That contains 9 lines of evidence for the reality of near-death experience and its consistent message of an afterlife. It's, as the book says, it was a New York Times bestseller, so it's been very influential to a large number of people. I've literally discussed the content of that book with millions of people over the years. So a very valuable resource. I'd also draw people to our research website. The URL is nderf.org. Hey, go see for yourself. We have literally over 4,000 experiences posted on the website, the largest by far publicly accessible collection of near-death experiences in the world. If you go there and go under experiences, drop down to exceptional experiences, I'm pretty sure if you read even 10 or 20 of these most detailed near-death experiences, it could literally change your life. You could see vividly the reality of everything we've been talking today and a whole lot more. An incredibly positive message for anybody that takes that adventure and follows those links and reads the book and studies it themselves further.
Well, thank you very much for joining us today, Dr. Long, and for shedding some light on this completely new realm that's growing largely in recognition of near-death experience. Great talking to you.
Well, great interview, great questions. So big thanks to you and everybody. Really appreciate it. This has been a super experience.
Thank you. And yeah, thank you to our audience members for submitting those insightful and really thought-provoking questions. I'll play the teaser for that interview with Dr. Roger Schwalt at the end of this, and you can find the link to that also in the description. That's looking at ultraviolet and infrared for boosting immunity. And you can subscribe to catch more videos like this by clicking on that subscribe button just below. Thank you for watching. Look forward to seeing you soon.
Thank you.
I do believe that supplementing with vitamin D is worthwhile, but we just didn't see the real benefits that we thought we would see from that. We know that people who stay outside in the sun more often are going to have higher levels of vitamin D. And I began to wonder, well, maybe there was something about the sun that was working in a completely different way that was benefiting the human body. About 100 years ago, especially in Switzerland, Austria, there were something called tuberculosis sanatoriums where they would take people up to very high altitude, and they noticed that people got better really quickly. It's actually very high energy light coming from the sun.
We hear about so many different antioxidants that can be taken to combat COVID-19 or different infections in general. Where would you say the melatonin that's stimulated through sunlight fits in?
It's at the very top.